Order, order, and a very warm welcome to this oral evidence session, the second one for our transition to the state pension age inquiry. And it's a pleasure to welcome this morning Phil Mawhinney, who's from Age UK, Morgan Vine from Independent Age, and Fabian Chessell from Policy and Practice. A very warm welcome. Thank you for coming along this morning. So we have a number of questions we'd like to put to you. I'm going to start and then we'll go around to other members. And I wondered if we could focus particularly on the Pensions Commission that's just been set up last summer. What do you consider the Pensions Commission should be doing in relation to adequacy? And perhaps if we could start with Morgan and Phil, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I think the first thing to say is we really welcome the Commission. We think this could be a real game changer for future generations of older people, making sure that they've got an adequate income. But as you said, Debbie, there is a question about the role of the Commission in that. And one thing that we would really like to see the Commission include is what does the state pension mean and how does the state pension play its part in making sure people achieve an adequate income. So, you know, all of the other interventions are welcome, but there will be people who we support at Independent Age who are living on a low income and who are relying almost solely on the state pension. So we want to make sure that the Commission considers that as part of their review.
Thank you.
Very similar comments, really. We understand that the Commission is looking to the future and will spend a lot of time looking at private pension saving, which is right. But currently we have 1 in 8 pensioners who are fully reliant on the state pension, and more people beyond that who are mostly reliant on the state pension. And that might change a bit, but there'll always be people who fully rely on the state pension. And so that has to be part of the discussion. We understand that there's discussions of adequacy, fairness and sustainability, but the adequacy question is very important for us, and that will be one of the key tests. What can the state pension be to make sure that those people have an adequate income, aren't living in poverty in a long-term way?
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we make the point that pension age poverty starts with working age poverty, and a lot of it is entrenched well before they reach the pension age. So there is a big piece around how the Pension Commission considers and looks at how we support people in the near retirement and the run-up into retirement so that they are not drawing down on their pensions and savings in order to meet basic cost of living.
What does near retirement mean? What sort of age are you talking about? 50s, early 60s?
It's a good question. I think it's a difficult one to answer in some ways, because I think one of the points we'll make is a lot of what we're dealing with is, especially with the near retirement cohort, is an ability to work issue. And that what we have got into the trap of in the past is using age as a proxy for ability to work. And so what we'd always be counselling is, instead of looking at an exact number, or we'd be asking, are we properly recognising ability to work, and are we supporting people who are unable to work?
Very good point. We were just talking before, I think there's a DWP report that says that the increase in health-related benefits in the recent years, is 25% of that was put down to the increase in state pension age from 2017, that was announced in 2017. Morgan, we know that some commentators have said, in terms of raising the pension age, is often framed as a trade-off to keep the triple lock. But what do you think?
We don't think those two things should be pitted against each other. We need to be thinking, or the government needs to be thinking, about what is the end result we want for everyone in later life to achieve. And I know the committee's done a lot on this in your bigger pensioner poverty inquiry. So what are we trying to get people to? And then what are the mechanisms that can be used to get there, rather than the triple lock or the state pension age, or which one do we decide on? It should be, what do we want to achieve, and is the triple lock the right mechanism? Is keeping the state pension age as it is? Are mitigations needed? Working out how we get people to that adequate income in later life.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on
Yes,
that?
hopefully I'll not just agree with Morgan on every single question, but I do agree with what she said. I understand the point, but I don't think it's helpful to see it as a direct trade-off.
Okay.
I think with the state pension age policy, as it rises, there's obviously a regressive effect to that, and that's an issue that should be looked at kind of independently, and I think we'll come on to how that can be mitigated for people who are most badly affected by that. So I think both questions need to be looked at, but it's not helpful to sort of see them as a seesaw.
And just to add, I think it's important to think about why the triple lock was first introduced, because pensioner poverty was incredibly bad, and it was to try and reduce it. It's played its part, but we know that pensioner poverty is back on the rise. So what other mechanisms could help or be more effective to get people where they need to be?
Thank you. Fabian, do you want to add to that? My last question is in relation to pensioner poverty, as we've just been talking about. And we know that welfare spending the Department for Work and Pensions, just under half of it is accounted for by the state pension and pensioner benefits. I think many people will be surprised at that. That is the biggest driver and the increase in DWP spending. But how can we reduce pensioner poverty now and in the future while containing spending on state pensions?
I'm happy to start. I mean, if we're talking about current pensioners, the primary issue is about the take-up of benefits, and particularly pension credit. It's obviously been discussed a lot, including by this committee. Obviously, that's means tested, and that's focused on the people who need it most. As Age UK, we give advice to a lot of pensioners, including around benefits. We help them to apply for and receive the pension credit they're entitled to, sometimes housing benefit, sometimes attendance allowance or other things, and that can make just a huge difference to people's lives, can increase their income by multiple thousands in a lot of cases. And we really welcome that the DWP's trying different things to boost the rate of take-up with that, including things around data sharing, but there's still a way to go with that. And it's a little bit of an old chestnut that's quite difficult to crack, but it's still a valid chestnut, and that needs to be the priority, really. And I think that'll continue to be the case even for future pensioners as well.
Fabian, you were talking about the working age poverty driving pensioner poverty, and that was certainly our pensioner poverty inquiry. What we found. I mean, what is it? Does it start then at working age? What would you say to my earlier question?
Absolutely, it starts at the working age. I mean, we're talking about people. One of the really interesting things about the pension credit is that if you're on the UC standard element and you're moving onto pension credit, your increase in income is 2.4x. You're moving from £440 to £987 a month. So, no one will say £987 a month is generous, but it is difficult to imagine who is able to live on £440 a month. When DWP gave their evidence to this committee about the impact of moving state pension age, their comment on this was like, well, the poverty ends when they retire, we put them on pension credit. And you're like, I don't know how that's justification. That is a period of time when people are living in really low income. I think this leads to a few things here. One is, we're calling for an increase to the UC standard element. That is where, that should be a livable amount, and we should be looking, if we're willing to fund people, as we are with the triple lock, so they're not in poverty because they're unable to work. Why does that only start at 67? Why don't we have that commitment should be wherever they are in life and unable to work? So we would be pushing for the increase.
So in terms of the UC standard allowance going up in April as part of the UC Act, is that something that you welcome?
Absolutely. That is absolutely brilliant. I think the first time since universal credit was introduced that the basic element was increased. That is absolutely the direction of travel, and we should be doing that more. It shouldn't be that UC is only livable if you're on one of the health elements. In terms of the take-up, just to go back to Phil's point and pick up on the data sharing, because I know that came up. Let's talk about pension. You asked about pensions, so I'll focus on the pensioner data sharing. I think there is an opportunity and there is a risk. Let me talk about the opportunity. We have a 17-week window in which you are allowed, before you qualify for pension credit, that you can apply for pension credit. And it is worth doing that because otherwise you can face a gap while you wait for your pension credit. So this is somebody already on very low income now facing, just absolute cash shortfall. You sit there and you go, okay, why isn't DWP working with more, and all the councils supported to work with more near retirees to make sure if they could qualify for pension credit, they've applied early. So I think that's a big opportunity. I think there's a big risk with pensioner data. One of the reasons why, as I came to the last committee, I pointed out that DWP withholds data on 60% of universal credit households from councils. meaning that 60% of residents, low-income residents, are invisible to councils and not getting support. That arose because at the moment when DWP took universal credit benefits in-house and took over processing from councils, it looks like that's the direction of travel on housing benefit. So we're facing a risk where DWP may repeat the same mistake and make a large swathe of low-income pensioner households invisible from councils. So we would ask, I think there's an opportunity for this committee to ask DWP to give it assurance that this mistake, this won't be repeated again, that council, as a result of changes to how housing benefit is processed, councils will not lose access to data.
Okay. That's a good point. Thank you very much. Morgan, did you want
to... just to quickly add, so just to talk to one of Fabian's points, it might seem like, you move from working age social security to pension age and everything's fine, but 20% of people who receive pension credit are still in poverty. So that's the first thing. So the income is not adequate. It's definitely not adequate for working age adults living on a low income, and it's also not adequate for pensioners. We speak to people regularly who call us saying, I think I'm getting everything I'm entitled to, but I just can't afford my bills, I can't afford my rent, I'm cutting back to dangerous levels, we would say, cutting back on food, cutting back on warm water, cutting back in an unhygienic way often. So we would want to see that tackled. When it comes to the state pension, that is definitely one fundamental element of tackling pensioner poverty, but as Phil said, it's not the only element. Lots of older people do believe that maybe the state pension on its own will give them an okay quality of life. We know that that's not the case for many. So that's why it's so important that the other side of this coin is the social security system. So for those who don't need the state pension to rely on because they're lucky enough to have savings, private pensions, workplace pensions, that's brilliant. But for the people that we support who we're worried about, we just need to make sure that whatever happens with the state pension, the social security system can make up that gap.
Thank you. Rushnara Ali.
Good morning. So we know that improvements in life expectancy has stalled and healthy life expectancy has reduced, and that's likely to continue, that trend. What should this mean for the state pension age?
I'm happy to start, yeah. So yes, it's obviously been discussed a lot that life expectancy and healthy life expectancy trends have flattened out and dipped in certain ways, and then obviously that it's very varied for different groups. So when we look at just average life expectancy, we're missing out the fact that people in certain deprived areas or socioeconomic backgrounds have much lower life expectancy, a much lower healthy life expectancy. And that means two things briefly. One is that a lot of people then can't work. Their healthy life expectancy technically might be 60, it might be around that, but actually what it means in reality is that that person has no ability to work up to 66 or up to 67. And so they're in that gap, which this committee is helpfully focusing on. And what that means, and we've done research with people in this situation, is that they are just kind of trapped in a limbo, and many of them want to work but can't work because of their health conditions, disabilities, caring responsibilities, or just they're not being hired in the labour market. And so they're just in this limbo, and the sense you get from the interviews is, gosh, I am stuck here and I'm counting the months until I reach state pension age, which used to be 65, used to be 66, and now is 67. So I think that's the key thing. And then the second point is just about how long will they receive their state pension for. And I mean, people don't know exactly how long they're going to live for, but people do say in the interviews, like, I know because of my long-term health, or I feel that the amount of time I'm going to get my state pension isn't very long, but I'm still trapped waiting for 67. And I think that's why this inquiry is so important, and it comes at the perfect time because it's risen twice quite quickly, it's about to rise again, and so that feels like the critical moment for sort of action mitigations to be taken.
And just to build on that, if the government wanted to try and, obviously we should be looking at life expectancy, and if that is stalling, why would we be thinking about increasing the state pension age? But you can also think about, could you use it in a cleverer way to try and make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're giving people notice, but we use it in a more dynamic way? Yeah. Our concern would be you can only do that on an average. And if you're doing it on an average, the groups that are going to be most impacted are the hidden groups. So to give you an example, in Wokingham, healthy life expectancy is 69, so nearly 70. Blackpool, it's 51. Yeah.
Yeah.
So people in Blackpool would be completely masked if an average was used, and then they could be waiting, 15 years, potentially more than that, to receive anything from the state pension.
Yeah, so you've got geographical inequality, you've got disability-related inequality, and then presumably there are specific other groups that are going to be worse off. Can maybe Fabian, can you or any of you talk us through what that disproportion? In effect, the system it's got built-in disadvantages that feed through into the future. So what specific recommendations would you make in terms of building that dynamic system so that this doesn't continue that trend of inequality?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And what this is making me think about was health-seeking behaviours. And poverty reduction is prevention. And I think it's easy for this committee to think life expectancy is DHSC's responsibility, but I think there's a big case that work and pensions have got a significant role to play. There is a quote that sort of brought tears to my eyes. It's from a worker who had used data and they'd reached out to someone who was in health, had a health condition, qualified for attendance allowance but didn't know it. And when she was helped to apply, she said the extra 250 weeks a week in benefits was life-changing. She said it allowed her to use taxis for her frequent hospital visits, and she can now meet her higher energy bills. The BBC had a coverage of a lady in a similar situation, and she said, "Oh, now I can go to Specsavers and buy some glasses. I can go visit my family once a month." So I think that there is, for me, this sort of cruelty that living in poverty reduces your life expectancy, reducing life expectancy reduces your access to state pension and pension credit, the amount of time that you get on that. You asked about specific recommendations, and I think that is exactly the right question. I've already spoken about UC standard element, obviously. Yeah. That is the obvious one. But the other one is making sure that people access the benefits that they're entitled to. We did some work earlier this year, Missing Out 2025 report that found 8 million low-income families missing out on about £24 billion of support. One of the key things is enrolling people in data or reaching them out with communication. We know that works. People, when we did the pension credit take-up campaigns to go to London, the background rate of take-up was about 3%. Jumps to, we've got it to about 35% of those people we've been reaching out to for a while. And sort of to bring this to life, we're talking about moving from, there's a notice on the bottom of your council bill to a letter that says, Dear Rushanara Ali, it looks like you qualify for pension credit. Here's how to apply. And some of the councils will actually call up people with health conditions or other vulnerability markers. So that dramatically increases take-up. What's blocking that? I raised at this committee last time that the 60% of data being withheld by DWP. And thank you very much. I know you took forward those questions to DWP. I read through their responses. And I think it's a case of the good, the bad, and maybe not the ugly, but then the overlooked. The good news is it was really wonderful to see they talk about liberalising and making it easier for councils to use data. Asking 370-odd councils to interpret a ticket of legislation gives you 370 answers, and lots of them don't use the data to what they're legally allowed today. Simplifying that the way the DWP is proposing would be a godsend, and if you wanted to ask a question, it might be, have you got legislative slot for that? If that's your plan, have you got a legislative slot? The bad is that in that response that they slipped the deadline for sharing 100% of UC data, or the system that will allow that, to 2027. So that's really quite unfortunate. That means another year of these households living in avoidable poverty, up and down the country. My question to DWP would be like, okay, these things happen, but is this I Love project in delivery phase yet? I think just getting a yes/no on that would be quite illuminating about whether they're sort of really running at this as fast as they could. The overlooked is employment support. The government's just is part of the devolved responsibility of strategic authorities. I looked through the devolution bill and it is silent on data sharing. What are we doing here? If we're giving them power, we need to give them data. If you ask them, I'm sure they'll say, it's in discovery phase, or we're looking at it, or the Mayoral Data Council will address it. I think there's maybe a far simpler route here, which is I'm going to make sure I've got the Act right, but the Welfare and Pensions Reform Act of 1999, Section 72, creates the gateways for sharing employment data with councils today from DWP and HMRC. But just amend that. Let's not go. Let's do this simple thing. We've got a lot of complex questions in front of us. This isn't one of those. So those would be my recommendations.
Did either of you have any further suggestions on what else?
It was only to build on, so the committee will know this from your inquiry, but the groups that we're most worried about include not just the geographies, but women, carers, racially minoritised groups, private renters, one-person households. One way that you can get to them, so Independent Age, as well as being a charity, so we take calls from people, we also grant fund community organisations, and that's been one way that we have tried to make sure we're reaching groups, and it's about trusted local support in their communities already that they already interact with. So, a lunch club for Bangladeshi women, for example, we fund an advisor in that lunch club so that they can have open chats about what's going on, how you're doing with your bills, and then the people feel comfortable to share with that person, they'd be speaking in the right languages, etc. So I think funding, whether it be local councils or community organisations, could play a really big part in helping the government target.
Do you think that takes me to the point about the advice and support, because over the last decade we've seen, the usual organisations like CAB and others having their resources cut. So then old people at that point in their lives often need, particularly those who are vulnerable, need support to access benefits that they may be eligible to, but the bureaucracy of doing that can be quite challenging. Is there a gap there?
We did some research with older people living on a low income, looking at the complexity of the social security system. It's all very well saying, the awareness is low or people just don't want it, but the system itself is really complicated. You could be a carer, you could get an underlying entitlement to carers allowance, and only then would you be eligible for pension credit. How on earth would you know that? So contacting national advice organisations like AGK, like Independent Age and others, helps people look at the whole picture and what they might be entitled to. Our advisors say that an attendance allowance form with a specialist advisor, it can be up to 2 hours on the phone with an older person. And that's somebody who's filling in the form every day. So there are definite small tweaks and changes that the department could make that would make the system simpler, and that would be a really good start for take-up.
Is there any work going on with you and the department to do exactly those sorts of things?
The department's moving forward a project looking at pension credit and housing benefit and how that can be interlinked, which hopefully will mean that the number of people receiving pension credit will increase because housing benefit has a higher take-up. But there are other things which the government isn't looking at the moment that would be simple, small changes to forms or documents that would make a big difference to the people going through the system. I can share what those exact recommendations afterwards. Yeah.
Send them in.
Just very briefly to add, and definitely echo what Morgan's saying again, the committee will know that the Crisis and Resilience Fund is about to start from April, and as I understand it, part of the purpose of that is to not just give people emergency crisis support directly, but to also build their resilience, and that part of that funding can go towards local advice organisations. So that is potentially very good, but it remains to be seen how that's going to pan out. And so it might be a good thing for the committee to, as that new fund beds in, I'm sure local authorities will face all sorts of challenges. It would just be good to see, what does that actually mean? What does that translate to in terms of support for local advice organisations who really can, in a lot of cases, build someone's financial resilience, but also just help people get benefits that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Thank you very much.
Credit where's credit's due. Moving the Crisis Resilience Fund to 3 years was very helpful, because it means that councils have got the time and ability to engage with voluntary and community sector practices. So.
Thank you. Yes, we are already asking questions about that new fund. Just very, very briefly, could you possibly write to us in terms of the impacts on frail older people and how, if they are being expected to work longer, how this may in turn affect their health? We heard a lot about it in the pension and poverty inquiry. So that particular group of frail older people and whether it worsens their health by being expected to work longer. Thank you so much. John Milne.
Thank you, Chair. If I could put this question first to you, Fabian, and I know you're a great advocate of data-led solutions. Do you believe that the DWP has the capabilities, data and processes to assess the impact of policies effectively before they're introduced?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to tell entirely from the outside. Just a couple of observations. I think, I'm sure this committee recognises, a decision of the size of state pension age is not going to be one that has changed dramatically because we ask the analysis question one way or the other. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what could we find? What would additional and better analysis do to influence our decisions in a meaningful way? I think the big thing, if I look back at the 2013 analysis on the state pension age increase, the absolute blind spot seemed to me to be what is the downstream impact on other services, on health and justice, for the younger cohorts, and social care for the older cohorts. And we know that there's an effect. Right? Age UK commissioned that wonderful research that found that pension credit pays for itself £1 for every.
Actually.
Sorry. Oh no! I think I'm buying the coffees after this. So the Independent Age commissioned the fantastic research that found for every £1 invested in pension credit, you get a £2 return in downstream savings. There's research from Milton Keynes Council, Cambridge Council, Liverpool Council have found payback ratios of 10 to 1 to 19 to 1 for the discretionary funds like the Crisis and Resilience Fund. So we know. And that was reported by the NAO and End Future Poverty. We know that there is a downstream impact. This government believes in prevention. It's really embraced the prevention agenda, but I don't see that reflected in the DWP impact analysis. So if I was asking anything, it would be, can we not get a view? Do we not believe that poverty reduction is prevention? Can we not get a view on that? And I wouldn't accept anyone saying that you can't do it or you can't estimate it. You can never get it perfect. But we're linking benefits data with healthcare data. We did it for Nuffield Trust. We've been linking benefits data with children's social care data, and we can see the impact of financial impoverishment on poorer social care outcomes for children. So we know that there are outcomes, and that would be the big, that link to prevention would be a big area that I would push on.
Thank you. And I think I'd agree that governments have been very bad at estimating the benefits of prevention and costing it the rewards. But any comments from?
Yeah, I can make just 2 points briefly in terms of the DWP's assessment, specifically with regard to the state pension age changes. Firstly, is that there was quite long gaps between when the legislation came to set state pension age change, and that would be the point at which some of the impact analysis was done. I think it was sort of 10-year gaps between the 10 legislation, roughly, between the legislation setting out the rise and then it actually happening. And I understand it would need to be done tied to the legislation, but that's just such a long time. And within that time, you might have a pandemic, you might have rising economic inactivity, you'd have the mixed age couples change. So quite significant things that change. And then if you only or you primarily have that initial analysis, then 10 years later the state pension age rises and those impacts haven't been sort of systematically updated, and maybe there's, in that sense, the mitigations, there's a chance to mitigate those effects has kind of been missed. So I think that gap is an issue and could maybe be repeated, analysis closer to the time. And then the second point, a lot of the analysis of state pension age change, the impact analysis was very good, and it looked at changes in income, sources of income. It didn't always translate that to changes in poverty rates and living standards, and like Fabian says, I'm sure it's quite difficult to do that, or certainly imperfect, but actually it's one thing to know that someone's income from earnings might fall. It would be helpful to know, well, how many people is that likely to put into poverty? So I think that would be my second point.
And the only point to add is with the Equality Impact Assessment, it looked at the impact of those with protected characteristics under the Equality Act. But when you look at life expectancy data, it's not available by ethnic group or disability, which we know are two of the main groups that we're really worried about. So we think there is more that could be done to try and work out how it would affect the groups that are going to be most disadvantaged from the change.
Thank you. That's great. And for the DWP to improve its policy making, what sort of things should it concentrate on? Should it try to work harder at understanding the views of affected parties? Is it about looking at the cumulative impacts of its policies? Where do you think it's lacking? Throw that open.
I don't have any specifics to add on that, I'm afraid.
I think there's something on involving people with lived experience, so whether it's current pensioners or whether it's people who are about to go through something and will be impacted by it, there's lots that could be done, and with the support of charities like us that could help inform DWP and give them sort of the real view of what this looks like. I think it's very easy when you're close to something to think, oh yeah, that makes sense, and everyone will understand that, and the rationale for that is clear. But when you're talking to the people who are going through it, who are quite far away from the policy, you can get a completely different perspective. So we'd really welcome DWP engaging as much as possible with people with lived experience of the issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And sort of to build on that point that Morgan raised, as well as her earlier point about the role of local services, I think there was really fantastic work that came out of Camden's test and learn on employment support for people living on people who are receiving LCWRA, using data naturally to enrol people. They offered people no pressure, confidential and very human conversation about where the situation is at and what they might need. So they got, I think, 78 people into that process. 40% of those were ready for employment support, and 90% showed up. And I think it yielded some really interesting insights. Firstly, this support works. You can get people back onto an employment track. But they learnt that people's fears hold them back. And I think this is quite important. They don't want to be pressured to do more than they're ready for. They fear a loss of benefits. The right to try was helpful in that regard. Further than they were. But also, they often had past negative experience with services. One person quoted, everyone just keeps referring me elsewhere. So there is something about making sure that the services are funded. And that those people face, sort of to underscore the fact that only 40% were ready for any employment support. These people face a multitude of challenges, employment and financial resilience. Housing and financial resilience, just having enough cash to live, are key blockers. So I think that understanding the complexity of people's situations, if you're trying to get them into work, is important. To Morgan's point.
And Phil, you alluded to this earlier, but the impact assessment of the rise to age 67, it was done a very long time ago. Do you think this needs updating?
Yeah, it would have to happen quite soon, obviously. But I think that, like I said earlier, this is why we're at the start of 2026 and state pension age is going to rise to 67 very soon. So it's just the critical time, and maybe we'll come on in a bit more detail to the need for mitigations and what that might look like. So yes, there's definitely a case for the department to look again at the risks, what's going to happen with the rise to 67 and how can we mitigate that. That's a critical question. It's a time critical question. The DWP's own analysis showing that when the state pension age rised to 66 and then it essentially, probably didn't use this language, but essentially caused poverty among 65-year-olds or an increase in absolute income poverty. That's really helpful, and it's great that the department did that. But that means that the same is likely to happen again over the next couple of years. And so where's the action to mitigate that? It's a known thing that's already happened and will happen again. It feels like, well, what's the next step? What can we do? And
it could be even worse this time, because we know the group in the most poverty and at working age life are the group in their sort of 55 to 65. So it could be even worse this time. So we need to make sure, I know that the government wants that group to be a priority. We need to make sure that their living standards are kept, and mitigations will be essential for that.
Thank you. And finally, this last question for you, Morgan. The department's got no plans, as far as we know, to change the mixed age couple rule. And we don't know how many people are actually affected. Do you think the department needs to take more steps to improve its understanding, and what could they do?
Yes, so we think that the mixed age couple rule is not a good policy and needs to be reversed. Mm-hmm. This is a good time to reverse it, because we're looking at, in the context of state pension age rising, the people that we support are going to have to wait even longer if they're in a mixed age couple. So, for example, one of our advisors recently helped somebody who was 79 years old, nearly 80. Their partner is 59, so a significant age gap. So the younger partner's still in working age. Now that younger partner can't work, they've got long-term health conditions, and the person that we were advising is nearly 80 and has not received their pensioner age entitlements. And I saw the session that you did with the Minister where he spoke about it's quite complicated and we have to do this on a household level. I don't think we disagree, but why does it have to be on a working age household entitlement level? Why can't it be on a pensioner age household entitlement level? Because then you'd be supporting somebody also in the most at-risk group in their 50s to 60s who has an older partner. It would be a double win because you'd also be helping them. If their income is low, which is why they'd be entitled to that benefit anyway, they're not in work. If they were in work, neither of them would be entitled to it because it's a household benefit. So we definitely think it's something that should be looked at. And for a lot of the people we support, they very much feel like they're being penalised for who they love, which isn't something anyone wants to be in a situation of. So we think it's something small and really specific that the government could do to look at, and also they should definitely look at the numbers because that was done a long time ago. We don't know how many people are impacted by this, what the financial implications are. Some estimates said a loss of up to £5,000 a year, others said up to £7,000. This is really significant for the groups and the households, the couples living on a low income. So we think as part of the state pension age, this should be raised again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Baines.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone. We just mentioned mitigation then, so I'd like to ask you about that if I can. Obviously, we're concerned about potential impacts on the forthcoming increase. There may be other increases in the future, in future decades, and I'm sure you know Dr. Susie Morris has been asked to look at that. What would your views be, and I'll leave it to you to decide who comes in first, what would your views be on how we might best mitigate against potential negative impacts? Would it be, would you ask the government to focus on better information and guidance so people can better plan for their retirement, or support to keep them in work longer? What would your suggestions be for the best way to mitigate?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so I think the first piece of the puzzle is obviously helping people to stay and work for longer, as long as possible, ideally up to state pension age, and there's ways to support people to stay in work. It's easier to get people into work, but both are possible. So that needs to be the sort of underlying thing. I think our view is that there will always be a minority of people just below the state pension age who just can't work. It's just not realistic. Even with the best will in the world from them, it's not going to happen. And like I said earlier, there's a group of people with multiple health conditions, often caring responsibilities, possibly in a couple, and they're just sort of stranded, and nothing's going to change that, and they're counting the months till they can get their state pension. For that group of people, we think there's a case for additional supplemental financial support for them directly through the benefit system. And others, and we in the past said, there could be early access to the state pension. Our view at the minute is more that actually just keeping the state pension age when you get the state pension makes a lot of sense. The important thing is to get money to people, and that could be done through the working age benefit system. So the specifics of that, are to be debated and discussed. We think there's a case that in the 3 years below state pension age, if people are in that situation, if it's impossible for them to work, if they're on various incapacity or disability or carer benefits to be decided, then there's a case for them to have some additional support. A bit like what the IFS have already said, that kind of model. I think that general model that they've set out is very good, but like I said, we think there's a case for that to be potentially extended and a bit more generous. So that would be our primary thing. There might also be mitigations in terms of tweaking work conditionality as well for people. We hear some stories of people just below state pension age really struggling with health conditions, sometimes after years of manual work, and they're still facing reasonably harsh conditionality through job centre, through that part of the system. And again, quite often people will want to get into work and will be applying for jobs, and for that minority, it's not going to happen, and the conditionality just is counterproductive and makes everything worse. That often those people will be providing care, and the conditionality, which is not going to lead to a job, is just making that more difficult. So we think there could be a case for sort of easing, and I know that easing of conditionality can be done on a discretionary basis currently, which is great, but it could be more formalised, basically. Those would be my two main things.
Yeah, just a bit. I mean, we support the idea of enhanced financial support if you're unable to keep working to the new state pension age, and that could take place in lots of different ways. The amount could be discussed, like do you bring them up to what the pension credit level is, or is it a different level? But we definitely think there should be some support there. Obviously, as I've said to John, the mixed age couple rule being reversed is a mitigation that could take place. And I think the key thing to say that to you as a committee is, although it might feel, the first change is going to start impacting people soon, any mitigation at any point will be welcome. Like, people are clinging on to living on working age social security, which we all know is not enough money. They are using tiny pots of savings early. They are taking out small private pensions and using it up before they hit state pension age. These people are not in a good financial situation. So anything that the government could do quickly would be welcome, even if it wasn't for 6 months. It would still be welcome. So I don't think any of us should be put off thinking, there's no point because it's going to start rolling out. And also we've got potential another age rise. So getting ahead of that would be really positive.
To add to that, I think we also agree with the increase in support, but I think maybe a bit different to the other panellists, we wouldn't be looking to try to tie that to the age group. We wouldn't be advising creating another cohort within universal credit of new retirees. I can see that it's tempting, but the benefit system, working age benefit system, is sort of on two principles. One is support should be linked to need, and that claimants are expected to work if they can. If your determination is these people can't work, regardless of their age, we should be supporting them so they're not living in poverty. So that would be probably the one area where it might be some...
but we would only be saying that for people who can't work.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's a different nuance then, or a different spin, I think, to be fair. I'd very much agree on the discretion and conditionality. Discretion is fantastic that it's there. There is room, if you wanted to expand that, to consider other activities such as voluntary contribution to society, grandchildren care while the parents are working. There are options there if you wanted to explore it. The point that I would make on mitigations is there's a really simple one. The government has made the CRF a 3-year programme. Excellent. But they funded it, I think, in nominal cash terms at steady levels. And that's about, I think, $1 billion a year. This programme's going to save, 8, 9, 10 billion, the state pension age increase. Why not put 1 in 10 pounds saved into the Crisis Resilience Fund? It's run by councils, it's dedicated to supporting people in the moment of need, and there's no one who's going to understand what councils are doing. What's happening on the individual basis better. There is no other arm of government closer to the individual than council. So, and it's there, it's set up. So that would be the mitigation I'd propose.
And David, just to your point on, is better planning. Of course, we can support people to make sure they're aware what's happening, that there's advice and information for them. But a lot of the people that we support, they're really good planners. They just don't have the income to stretch. They've been out of their part-time work, caring responsibilities, low-income job all their life, children, looking after their kids. So it's not that they haven't planned. They haven't got the money to do it. So anything we can do early to support them would be great.
They're already doing the best they can with what they've got. Yeah. You touched on, Phil, you mentioned early access to the state pension, which is something that some people have suggested. Your feelings, obviously, is against that, I presume. Are there any other opinions on early access to the state pension?
I think the tricky thing is, if you give early access literally to the state pension, you're muddying the age of the state pension, which gets very complicated. So a way that you could sort of do something similar but different, it sounds almost the same but it's not, is if you gave early access to something like pension credit, that's not the state pension. That's an entitlement that lifts you up to a level close to the state pension. So that's a different way of doing it, where you wouldn't be suggesting that for some people they get their state pension at a much younger age. You'd be suggesting they get a social security entitlement that was meant for somebody in later life a bit earlier. And it's only for the group, to be clear, that cannot continue to work. There will be lots of people who, are doing a job, maybe in an office, they really enjoy it, 1 extra year, no problem, not even thinking about it. But there are so many people that we speak to, labourers, people who work in the NHS, farmers, factory workers, they can't even make the current state pension age. So an extra year is, every single day is a struggle to get there. So they're the group we need to be focused on.
I'd just really like to reinforce that point as well. We see exactly the same thing. People who do manual work, but people who've done care work, like paid care work as well, is such an essential role. To do that for 30, 40 years, and then either just every day is a painful struggle to reach state pension age, or they've given up because it's kind of impossible. And just very briefly, I think I was reading the Cridland report back from 2017, which we'll all be familiar with, and it just really struck me how some of his arguments just are completely relevant today, even more relevant today. So he made the argument that you could give pension credit to people 1 year below the state pension age, I think when it rises to 68. But his reasoning was that these people who should get this will have significant barriers to any level of employment because of ill health or caring responsibilities for a long period of time. They'll have insufficient wealth to support themselves while they wait. They'll have a lower life expectancy than average, and as a result they'll receive the state pension for a shorter period than everyone else. And I just thought, wow, you could write that today and it's as true as it ever was. And so coming back to the point of timing, if that was written in 2017 and since then the state pension rose and is about to start rising again, it feels a bit like things are getting quite time critical.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, I mean, is there a consensus on the panel about that age that we might be targeting additional support? So, Phil, I think you're suggesting 3 years. Within 3 years, there might be. Is that a consensus, Morgan?
Yeah,
what
I think
about you, Fabian? What do you think?
So we would look at ability to work no matter the age. So we would avoid creating a separate group of near-retirees.
Okay.
But there are going to be different considerations as you get older. So it's not ignoring that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Morgan.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think we'd support 3 years. We understand that decisions might be taken just to mitigate for that 1 year that people are missing out. But I think both Age UK and Independent Age are really worried about that group in their early 60s. So any interventions that would support them, and this is one that would, who are living on a low income and living in poverty, would be welcome. So yeah, 3 years we support as well.
Thank you. Jo Baxter.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us this morning. Just following on from the previous questions about mitigations, given that we've had plenty of notice of the forthcoming increase in the pension age, why do you think no mitigations have been put in place?
Or was that why have no mitigations been put in place? I don't have a lot to say. I mean, obviously mitigations bring a cost to that, and governments aren't overflowing with money, but I think we understand that. But I think, like Fabian said earlier, there is a sort of preventative and downstream problem with that kind of thinking. The DWP and IFS analysis showed that when the state pension age rises, you have an increase in poverty among the year below, potentially long-term consequences from that as well, which bring their own costs. So it depends how you look at it, but I think if you do nothing, then you're effectively saying, okay, state pension age is going to rise to 67. 66-year-olds will see an increase in poverty. They'll have been out of work on very low incomes for a long time. Clearly that has an impact on their health, on the NHS, etc. And I think looking at the unpaid care side as well, I mean, we think people who've been doing intensive amount of unpaid care for years below state pension age, that's something that keeps people from work. And if you sort of take that for granted and don't do anything about those people, you can lose some of that unpaid care. And we've got an ageing population, we've got an ageing population of old people. Unpaid care is just so critical, and I think if there's ways to enable people, it's partly about flexibility for work and carers leave, but it's also about giving carers an amount to live on. I mean, some of the quotes from our research, people who were caring for their partner just say, oh my goodness, the amount I get in carers allowance, I feel so unvalued and worthless, and I can't live on it. So I think just bringing in that care side is quite important as well. I don't know if that helps the question.
Yeah, and just to build on that, lots of the people we support who are living on low income, they're not thinking 2 years ahead, 5 years ahead. They're thinking, what am I going to eat tomorrow? Am I going to be warm enough at the weekend? Where could I go to, see friends and family that's not going to cost me anything? So they're often not able to look that far ahead. So one suggestion is that group has not been shouting loudly about the impact of this rise because they've been focused on their everyday. I would also say that the people that we support often share with us that they feel hidden, they feel less confident to advocate publicly. These are not necessarily groups who feel confident engaging in policy debates. speaking to journalists, raising noise. That's why I think it's so important that this committee is looking at this, because sometimes this group is hidden, they're ignored, they seem to be silent, and they are then overlooked. So it's easier to say, oh, you know, we're just going to do this, nobody's kicking up a fuss about it. But we need to, because we all know, we speak to people in this situation every day, that this is going to have an absolutely massive impact on them when they get there. And it's already having an impact on the people that we support who don't have enough money in later life. So I think personally that is one problem, that they feel less confident to advocate. So maybe the public noise from the group is less.
I can pick up the advocacy point. I think we end up in a situation where we're content and we're happy as a society to fund people at retirement age because we go, yeah, they're not expected, they can't work. But we kind of use age as a proxy for that. And actually what's happening is that's not a single date that happens. It's not like they were able to work when they were 66 and 364 days and unable at 67, obviously. But we've fallen into that shorthand where we've gone, they're deserving, they're not deserving. And we need to, I think there is, one of the reasons advocacy doesn't land is we need to recognise that there are lots of reasons people don't work, and it doesn't just start at retirement age. And that is not just feckless people trying to get onto disability. Like that is, you know, a real barriers. There's also a technocratic part of the answer. If I refer back to the sort of comments of John about prevention's not costed. I mean, the government, you know, there's a giant system with Treasury at the centre checking everything for cost-benefit analysis. And if the cost says, oh, we can save this money, and so the benefit is we can save all this money, and the only cost is, well, some of them will go on to UC, like, of course the numbers are going to make sense and the whole system will make that happen. So we need to have a number that says this is the value of prevention, and Treasury needs to recognise that in business cases. So I mean, also the government has done stuff. There is like 50 plus champions, which, you know, have been interventions along the way. I think it's always worth recognising when some progress has been made, even though we'd all say we want more.
Very what you said earlier, Morgan, about any mitigations at any point being welcome. Given we've got such a short time before the pension age starts to increase, what could the government realistically do now?
Well, I guess it depends on the systems in place. So one thing is making sure that working age adults are getting everything they're entitled to as a minimum, because, take up is one thing. Although I completely agree with Fabian, and, you know, we work with lots of charities in the working age space. We all know that money is not enough to live on. So, you know, get them everything they're entitled to. But then there's a point of adequacy. So I know there's a big campaign for, you know, UC to be uprated, things like that. So I'm sure that would be welcome. We work less in that space, but I'm sure that would be welcome. But even the enhanced support, you know, the mechanism to enact enhanced support, I don't know how long that would take necessarily, but it doesn't feel like it would be years and years in the making. Like the government could act on that quite quickly if they make a decision to do it. The mixed age couple rule would not be too difficult to undo quite quickly. It was the policy before, so it would just be undoing something rather than having to create something from scratch. So I think there are things that could happen quickly. And I mean, struck also, Phil, by what you were saying about the Cridland report. So just looking at what he was saying about the flexibility to work part-time and the run-up to retirement, how do you see that working? Do you want to say a bit more about how that might help that particular age group?
Supporting people to work part-time?
Yeah, because obviously, you know, there's lots of jobs in which that move may be more difficult to achieve than others. So getting everybody that flexibility might be difficult. Yeah. How do you see that working?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think from our own insight and because some local age UKs, there's 115 local age UKs around the country, some of them support people of this age to try and get into work and to try and stay in work. I think that can be really helpful. I think sometimes they say part-time work is really good and is the best that can be achieved for people. So I think recognising that, but there might be ways to recognise that better within the universal credit system, I'm not sure. But making sure that there's enough, I guess it's a form of employment support for people, keep them working, get them into work. I mean, just referring to my relevant notes, some of the insight that we get from local age UKs who help people in their 60s. They talk about the barriers that they face to work, and actually some of that, quite often people say confidence. People lose confidence, especially if they've been made redundant after being in the same job for 30 years or something. I don't want to get too much into mental health and different age groups, but there's definitely more quite serious mental health issues among people in their early to mid 60s than might be assumed, and that can make it really hard to get into work or to stay in work. And then obviously skills, there's more digital exclusion than people might realise. So there's a set of issues, and then obviously the health issues that are maybe more common among 60 to 65s, musculoskeletal issues being an obvious one. But again, even if you look at the PIP statistics, mental health issues are pretty common as well. So I think there's a set of challenges for 60 to 65-year-olds to stay in work, to get into work. Age UK, local age UKs are an example of kind of sort of services that can help that. Obviously, we've had the Mayfield review. That seems really promising with the focus on return to work and staying in work. The only note of caution with Mayfield is that it's a 3 to 7 year programme, and the state pension needs to rise to 67 in the next couple of years. So it's important to have those long-term things, but we can't put all our eggs in the Mayfield basket.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I was asking the original question about what can realistically be done.
There's something on ageism as well, where there could be some quite tangible, quick changes. So, not to say that it's going to completely change the game, but there will be people in their mid to late 60s who read a job advert and think that the language in that advert rules them out. You know, language used that they associate with younger people, interview processes. Sometimes if people are putting their age or their birth date on a CV or job application, sometimes they could be ruled out. So ageism is prevalent in the workforce, and to make sure that's not there so that anyone who is able to work would be welcome.
Can I just take us back slightly to another point that you made earlier, which was about advice, and information for people approaching their pension age. So following the maladministration and communicating pension age increases to the 1950s women, how effectively do you think the department has improved its communication with older people?
I don't have a lot of detail to add on that. I'm not entirely sure what has or hasn't happened. I know it's a live issue. We certainly support the Ombudsman's finding of maladministration and the need for compensation. I think the whole question of communication to people about their state pension age, we've had bits and pieces of insight from people that we've interviewed, and firstly, it's important to just not assume that everybody aged 50 to 65 is online, because that's not the case, and so communication has to be more than that. But also, kind of echoing something that Morgan said earlier, some people are just too overwhelmed by the hardship that they're faced to go on a website and plan and know what their state pension age is and know what they're likely to get from the state pension or other things. So one full-time carer who spoke to us, aged around 60, was uncertain what retirement will mean, what she'll be entitled to. She said she'll look into the details, but has no time at present. I'm just about controlling what I have at the minute. So there's a sense of overwhelm. That doesn't answer the question, because you still need to have effective communications, but I think we just need to remember that for some people struggling in real hardship, it's almost an irrelevant question. The relevant point is, are they getting enough support through the system?
And some people think they will be able to continue working past state pension age. So they're carrying on. You know, we work with a person who's a taxi driver. Oh, I'll just keep going. He's now in his 70s. Well, now the doctor said, no, you can't keep going. Your health is not good enough to be sitting all day. Like, it's not good for you. So some people make an assumption. Just touching on your specific question. So we did some nationally representative polling, people over 50. You know, what are you thinking about when you get to retirement? What's happening? 64% very worried about their future finances in retirement. 67% of renters don't believe that their retirement income will cover their rent. In terms of awareness, only 7% of people over 50 felt they knew a lot about what their financial situation would be. 7. Only 7, yes. Wow. And we get calls to our helpline from people who are, say, 65, saying, what will happen when I hit state pension age? This is my current situation. What's going to change? What might I be entitled to? Please try and help me work it out. So some of them will continue working because they don't know they might qualify for something at that point.
Sorry, what 7% of how many people we polled?
So this was nationally representative polling. 7% of people over 50 that we polled felt they knew a lot about what their financial situation would be when they retire. So that obviously is tiny.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
93 don't feel they know enough.
Yeah. And 56% said they knew not much or nothing at all. So that's nearly half. Wow. I'll send these to the committee.
Thank you.
So definitely more to be done. And you know, the government, you know, is moving things forward, but it feels like maybe things are at a bit slower pace. Yeah. We could absolutely be utilising community organisations, councils. You know, there's organisations out there that can get this information to people. Let's support them to do it.
Yeah, I was thank you, Morgan. That was what I was going to say. It doesn't just have to be DWP doing all the communication. The councils are a big piece. You know, DWP and HMRC both have actually been really good on expanding use of the data for other reasons. So homelessness was added in the last month or two. Homelessness prevention, brilliant. But we're still dealing with the fact we've only got 40% of the households on UC, which is silly.
Very, very quickly then, just in terms of the DWP are committed to having an action plan to ensure maladministration of communication of state pension reforms isn't repeated. Is there anything specifically you think needs to be included in that action plan?
So clear, proactive, targeted communications to the groups most at risk rather than going to everyone. We know who's more likely to be on low income, so let's go to them direct. Also things like there are free schemes out there, like Pensions Wise. People don't know they exist. It's free. The people we support cannot access paid for independent financial advice. So anything the government can do to proactively promote things like Pensions Wise would be a step in the right direction.
Nothing to add.
Thank you. Fantastic. David Baines.
Thank you, Chair. You've sort of just answered the question I was going to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. Because we've talked about, it touched me what you were saying, Phil, about that carer who was talking about being overwhelmed, and that's a situation I recognise from conversations I've had with people I know personally, but constituents especially. What can councils and DWP do to encourage take-up of working age benefits for people, particularly those near to retirement age, older people? What can they do? Are there any quick wins you think that they could do to help these people who are really struggling now get the support they're entitled to?
Yeah, do you mind if it's okay to jump in a bit? This is what we're doing. We work with over 100 councils on doing that. And the key process is you want to move away from mass communication. So if we know that if you put signs up with radio adverts, you get 3%, or pension credit numbers, 3% of the people missing out signing up. And what you can do is either do targeted communications when you write to them and say, like you're pre-approved for a credit card, it's like, David, we think you're missing out on attendance allowance. Or you can go one step further and auto-enroll people. So councils are increasingly looking at least for council tax support, which is under their control, how do we just put people on? There's a big programme with Thames Water in London where they are going through boroughs and enrolling people automatically onto water social tariffs in the water arrears. So that canon is being done. So more councils can do it, more councils could do more programmes using it. And, I talked a bit about earlier the enabling legislation and support, even just endorsement from DWP has a big effect because some councils are out there doing everything they can. They're within the law, but they're like using their powers, and some are sort of 10, 20 feet behind the line because they're like, oh.
That's called lottery, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I think there's some real opportunity on that.
That's exactly what it is a postcode lottery because some councils have the money to invest in teams that literally door knock or phone people directly. They've got the data and they go and help them fill the forms in. Other councils have had to cut all of their social security support. So depending on where you live, depends on the service you're going to get from your local provider. So anything central government can do to make sure that councils are well resourced to do those calls. Yeah. We did a project with councils across the country, and some of them are absolutely amazing, and they're doing really innovative things. They're being clever with their approaches. We did a toolkit I can share with the committee about good practice from different councils, just to help councils learn from other councils across the country. But the problem for so many of them is their funding's been cut, and they're having to prioritise other things. And those social security teams within councils make a massive difference if they've got them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes all the questions to our first panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming along today and the excellent information that you provided to us. Thank you. Order, and a very warm welcome back to the transition to the State Pension Age inquiry. And we welcome our second panel for this particular evidence session. And we are joined by Dr. Daniella Jenkins from the Women's Budget Group, warm welcome. Tiffany Tsang from Pensions UK, again, a warm welcome. And Justin Wray from the Association of British Insurers, again, nice to see you here today. And I'm going to kick off with questions. So as you probably heard from the first panel, we're particularly interested in what the Pensions Commission are doing. And again, within the scope of the terms of reference, they have a framework that asks them to consider the pensions framework that is strong, fair and sustainable. What do you think the main challenges they're going to face in relation to this? And perhaps in your response, could you also reference the aspect of adequacy, which they have also been asked to look at? Who would like to start?
Start.
Lovely, Tiffany. Over to you.
Thank you for the invitation for this morning. So it's nice to meet all of you and to be here. It's an honour. So at Pensions UK, we encourage first and foremost a holistic view of the entire pension system. And so I mention that because I'm going to insert some bits that are currently out of scope in the Pensions Commission, but I think is important to have in the mix in the discussion. So taking them in turn, you mentioned adequacy. So that is high on our agenda at Pensions UK. It always has been. We think that for the Pensions Commission, there needs to be a focus on accumulation over the entire life course. What that looks like in practice really comes in three main factors. So one, raising contribution levels. This is something we've been championing at Pensions UK for a long time. Specifically, we recommend raising contribution levels to 12%. We can get into that later if it's helpful to the committee. Then second, improving participation among those that we know are most likely to opt out. There is some data around that, which we can also talk about. And then supporting long-term adequacy for future retirees. So what can we do today for tomorrow's retirees and for young people? And it's important under the adequacy umbrella to focus on three main cohorts. So those who are closest to retirement, those who are in their mid-career, they face very specific financial pressures that are different to the other two. So the third group is, of course, the younger folks who have the advantage of a longer time horizon, but the disadvantage of uncertainty. The next objective that you mentioned is fairness. There's a lot of debate that needs to be had about what we mean as a collective about fairness, but at Pensions UK, we're focusing on how different groups of people experience the pension system, and it doesn't, how you might experience it is not how I might, or how someone who has particular characteristics might experience it, and it's important to kind of break that down. Look at the specific structural barriers that I know the previous panel were talking about. For us, factors that could be driving some of these structural barriers include low volatile earnings, carrying responsibilities, cycling in and out of work, multiple jobs, interrupted work histories, certain characteristics like being a woman, being part of a certain ethnic group. The key question for us is really, are these different groups being given the reasonable opportunity to build the adequate retirement income that they need? And the last one is sustainability. So for us, just in the bare bones, it's about affordability. That can take different forms, but affordability that still protects people from poverty. So really making sure the state pension, the triple lock are affordable, but it has to be there, making sure it's affordable for employers, and making sure that they're all working in tandem to really smooth the journey for savers.
Thank you. We'll go down the line, shall we? So Justin, would you like to comment on my question?
Yes, sure. And of course, thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak today. Before I answer the question on adequacy and so on, I mean, I would like us to bear in mind that actually some things have got better. I mean, both in terms of what the first panel were discussing and now. We have to remember that pensioner poverty has gone down, that in relation to private pensions, the financial position of defined benefit schemes has improved out of all recognition. So, there are definitely issues, but some things have improved. But turning to adequacy, I mean, while pensioner poverty as a whole has improved, there are for sure groups of citizens with inadequate retirement income. And I mean, Tiffany mentioned some of these, women, many women, Generation X, self-employed, so on. I mean, generally speaking, one can say that while while pensioner poverty has improved, pensioner inequality has not. So there are definitely vulnerable groups out there. Specifically, it is entirely foreseeable that housing will worsen adequacy. I mean, the proportion of retirees renting privately is set to triple by 2040. That's only 14 years away, which in pension terms is kind of like the day after tomorrow. So, that is definitely an issue that is foreseeable and will have a significant impact. Relating to sustainability, I mean, of course, there are issues in relation to the sustainability of the state pension. The other aspect I would perhaps emphasise is the interaction of the state pension with the private pension system, and that changes to one has an impact on the other. We know, for example, that a lot of people are withdrawing their entire defined contribution pot as cash. I mean, according to the FCA, it's something like 56%. We know that some pensions are being drawn down at an unsustainable rate. Again, something like 40% of plans are being drawn down at an unsustainable 8% or more. Changes to the state pension age will have an impact on the private pension and may influence those trends as well. Finally, in terms of fairness, I mean, the system tends to benefit full-time uninterrupted employment, and that if you are not, if you're one of the many for whom that is not the experience, then the outcomes that you'll get in terms of your pensions may not be what you expect. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify? I think I'm right in saying that in recent years, pensioner poverty has it has slightly increased. So I'm not quite sure where you may be what you might be referring to when you say it has decreased, but we'll hold that one there. Daniella, would you like to give your contribution?
Thank you for the invitation to give oral evidence today. And I think it's really important to point out that, yes, I'm here representing the Women's Budget Group, and pensions are an issue that disproportionately affect women. Women make up the majority of people of pension age and above. Women also make up the majority of pensioners who are living in poverty. Just to put some numbers around that, 54% of those above pension age are women. 57% of pensioners living in poverty are women. And 34% of pensioners living in poverty are single women. So when we're talking about pensions policy, we are talking about a policy area that primarily is affecting women. And yet, we know when we ask those questions about sustainability, about adequacy, is that the pension system does not serve women well. We know this because we have a gender pensions gap of 35% if we look at that overall, looking at DWP's figures and ways of calculating that. But we know that that becomes much more acute as we look at different age cohorts. I think it's worth pointing out that there is a gender pensions gap at every single age cohort. This is not an issue that affects older women. This is not an issue that is going to go away over time without intervention. We know that women are accumulating less in terms of their pensions income right the way down the age spectrum, 16 to 24. So if we don't make those changes, we're actually breeding a whole generation of women who are facing poorer pensions outcomes in decades to come.
It was your argument, Daniella, that we should be, the Pensions Commission should recognise that particular cohorts are experiencing pension poverty disproportionately, so their response should reflect that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
But I think it's even more important to recognise, because people often jump to, well, what is it about women's lives? Why women have that? Mm-hmm. That actually the UK has the second worst gender pensions gap in the OECD, only worsted by Japan. So we know that there are aspects within the design of our current pension system that are leading to the size of the gender pensions gap within the UK. It's how we framed our pension system. It's the balance of state pension versus private pensions. It's the type of private pensions that we have that are leading towards that gender pensions gap. And even more, before we even start to say, well, this is a trade-off between women's pensions and overall, We know that systems that are more equal overall are better served in terms of the outcomes for women. So actually part of that is actually a result of the inequalities that we see within our pension system overall that is partly driving that gender pensions gap. If we address those inequalities, we address women's pensions outcomes overall across the generations and the age cohorts.
Perhaps you'd like to start in the response to this next question, which is about the state pension and whether this should be within the purview of the Pensions Commission. It's not explicit at all. And as you probably again heard from the previous panel, nearly half of the social security budget is spent on state pension and pensioner benefits. So what is the sort of balance in terms of ensuring the reduction in pensioner poverty, but also in terms of affordability of the welfare budget?
I think when we look at the affordability of the welfare budget, when we look at pensions, we absolutely have to look at the interactions with other areas of welfare as well, particularly in terms of the state pension. So answering your question, I think we do need to understand that the system is made up of a number of composite parts, and the state pension is obviously a significant part of that. We know that women are much more financially reliant on the state pension in old age, so that is just part of the reality for women. Actually, we know of people who are likely to live only on the state pension. Those are much more likely to be women. Those are much more likely to be people who are living in poverty. And it has always been thus. So if we separate out those interactions, really we're losing sight of, when you talk about adequacy, what people need to live on in older age. But there are other blind spots as well that also interact in terms of the welfare budget, most notably housing. So if we get technical for a moment in terms of how we calculate adequacy, there are different measures of adequacy. We can look at things like the target replacement rate. The Turner Commission made some assumptions around that. Pensions UK, that I know that Tiffany's representing today, also have some numbers around what adequacy might look like and some of the calculations around that. We know that a lot of those assumptions around housing have not been priced in. And so that assumption that as people age, that they're much more likely to own their own home so that your housing costs go to nil, we know that that is just not the lived reality for many cohorts who are coming up to retirement age.
Again, is this something that the Pensions Commission needs to consider?
Absolutely.
Okay. Lovely. Justin, and we'll go down the panel the same way we went up. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, there is, of course, a separate review of state pension age carried out by Susie Morrissey, which is intended to feed into the Commission. So I'm sure some of the issues will be dealt with there. I mean, in terms of those who rely only on the state pension, I mean, I would agree with what Daniella said, that, I mean, this may give you a minimum income according to Pensions UK, but it won't do more than that. And again, she is right to highlight, as I did in my first answer, the impact of housing and how that is something that is going to significantly change in the coming years. Also, I think of relevance here is that on the private pension side, private pension income is also forecast to fall in the next few decades. That sort of DWP forecasts that in something like 2050, occupational pensions income will be 8% lower in real terms than it is today. So there's the state pension, but there's also the private pension system as well. Can I just finally come back to the point that you made, Ms. Abrahams, on poverty? I mean, I'd just make 2 points in response. One is that now if you look at who is a typical poor person, previously it would have been a pensioner, now it is typically someone of working age. Secondly, I mean, I think there's very interesting work that DWP have done which relates to the kind of cohort 60 to 69, which the first panel addressed. And what you can certainly see there is that the group who is 60 to 64 is markedly worse off on most indicators than those who are 65 to 69. So, of course, there is pensioner poverty, but it is also, one can believe that and also believe that pensioner poverty as a whole has declined.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's obviously we did a lot on this last year in terms of the pension and poverty inquiry. So I'll refer you to that, but we had to clarify that for the record. Thank you so much, Justin. And Tiffany.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to build on what my colleagues have said, but first want to say we as well were very surprised the state pension was not included in the scope of the Pensions Commission, given we know that the majority of people rely on the state pension in their retirement. So it seems unwise to not look at the system as a whole. So we would very much encourage the Pensions Commission to do that if possible. And in terms of the issues flagged by Daniella, what's key here for us is that I think what can we do, what policy levers can we pull to help smooth the journey for certain groups? And one of the things that we champion is removing the lower earnings limit and also lowering the age at which people can qualify for automatic enrollment. And this in particular would benefit women, because we know that women tend to be the group that works the most in terms of part-time hours, has the most interrupted work history. So those are sort of structural things that we can do to the system, pull levers to help smooth that journey for women. I'd go back to my original point about contributions. So we need to be able to control the things that we can control. So there are some systemic things, inequalities in society that pensions cannot solve. But what we can do is try and control making sure that people's first pound at earning works for them in their savings. So it's removing the lower age and the lower earnings limit, but also making sure that contribution rates are really where they need to be so that there's additional security, additional safety net when people come to the retirement age. And I just wanted to flag as well that we haven't yet talked about the tax system, which is obviously a huge, knotty thing that we can't get into specifics about. But it would be remiss to not mention it and say there have to be incentives in the system for all the different actors involved. Obviously, for savers, it would mean, for instance, if people are well enough and able and willing to work in later life, that the tax incentives at the very end of one's working life really encourage that. So the MPAA, the money purchase annual allowance, really need to monitor that over time, make sure that it stays at a level that is incentivizing for work. We didn't support the salary sacrifice limit that was put in, particularly because it doesn't incentivize saving into a pension. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is our retirement living standards, which I think Danielle was alluding to in her comments. So we view this came from Pensions UK. We view this very much as a tool, not a target. And I think when we come to talk about information and guidance, we think even though it doesn't include housing, which is a key issue, it's something that is meant to be a reflection of how people right now are experiencing retirement, and it's a guide for what people should be aiming for, but by no means is a target. It's meant to be a tool.
Thank you. Rishnara Ali.
Thank you. To this committee, Chris Curry said that the Pensions Commission would need to look at how different parts of the pensions system interact and vary across different parts of the population. You've already touched on some of this. Can you say more about how the Commission could go about doing this? And also, before panellists answer the question, I just wanted to declare an interest. I'm on the board of a trust that provides funding to the Women's Budget Group. Who would like to kick off? Justin?
I can say a little bit about that. And I mean, we would agree with what Chris Curry said, that you do need to look at the interaction. You need to look at the interaction between state and pension. You need to look at those who are working and those who are not working. I mean, for example, for those who are working, self-evidently a kind of workplace pension will be enhanced if you are in work, and that therefore supportive measures to keep people in work are important and should be seen, as Tiffany said, in a kind of holistic way. So measures such as health and protection insurance, flexible working, these are all important, arguably more important as the workforce gets older. Then in terms of those who are not working, and I mean 2/3 of people stop working before state pension age, again, one needs to consider those who are relying only on the state pension and as was discussed in the first panel, I mean, there are definitely consequences in terms of poverty when the state pension age is increased, and it hits particularly hard for certain groups, those who are single, those who are renters. And then, of course, the interaction for those who are not working, the interaction between their private pension and their state pension. That, as I've already said, the private pension is also set to decline in real terms, and that as changes are made to state pension, in particular state pension age is increased, this increases the risks of people making suboptimal decisions on their private pensions, withdrawing all their defined contribution pot in cash and taking a sort of significant tax hit, drawing down their pension in an unsustainable way, and that supportive measures to address these sorts of things also need to be part of an overall package. The need to communicate these changes, targeted support, dashboards, reporting, particularly perhaps on certain groups. All of these things are important. Can I just make one more point? I mean, Tiffany's mentioned contributions as well. In a sort of DC pension system, I mean, in the end, the size of the pot is the biggest problem. That, I mean, there's a lot of emphasis on things like value for money, investment strategies, decumulation choices. All of these things matter. But in the end, if the pot is inadequate, they don't make much difference. And therefore, if adequacy, size of the pot is the main thing, you cannot ignore contributions.
Tiffany, do you want to come in? Do you want to add anything on that one?
Oh yes. I mean, just to say as well, I completely agree with Chris Curry and with Justin. The different parts of the pension system, how they interact, really must be looked at in tandem. It's a really rare opportunity to really take pull the lens back and join the dots. I mean, the last Pensions Commission was 20 years ago. So I think this is our moment to get the solutions right for generations to come. I'm going to sound like a broken record by the end of this session, but contribution rates, that's really where we're coming from, because that's an additional safety net, additional security level to give people that sense of a bigger pot waiting for them. And as Justin said, starting them early from the very beginning gives people a longer horizon, a longer time to accumulate the returns from investment. So I think contribution rates raising to 12%, lowering the age in which people can start automatic enrollment, and removing the lower earnings limit, that really will help make your first pound of savings work from the very beginning, and that helps, as we know, women in particular who work more part-time and have interrupted work histories. Again, the other parts of the system I've already touched on is the tax system. So again, making sure NPAA, later life, how does that fit if people want to extend their working life into the future, and ensuring as well that the guidance and tools, including our retirement living standards, all work together in tandem in a complementary way.
Thank you. Daniella, anything on this? And also, I wanted to ask you a further question about the gender pensions gap report.
No problem.
Yes.
So I think absolutely the system needs to be looked at as a whole. One of the areas that is not within the terms of reference for the Pensions Commission is tax, which has been mentioned today, but I think it's absolutely important to recognise that tax reliefs are regressive. They reward those that earn more, that have bigger pension pots, and they take money away from the state and give that to the rich. What we recognise is that tax reliefs could either be done away with altogether, or we could look at making that more progressive. I also think we need to look at the lived reality of contributions. I absolutely endorse the view that we need to bring more people into the private pension system, and auto-enrollment has been absolutely fantastic at achieving that. But we know that a lot of women, lower earners, so 69% of those who are earning under £10,000 a year are women. They are not benefiting from employers' contributions or tax reliefs on those contributions. Now, yes, we could lower the limit to bring those women in, or all of those lower earners in fact, but that's taking money away from what they're earning today to put into a private pensions pot for tomorrow. Now, we all understand the benefits of compound interest, but we also understand the lived reality of I need money now.
So
and trading off tomorrow for today doesn't make sense.
So what should be done about that? Because that's clearly a problem that can't be solved by just changing.
Absolutely. I think we should absolutely look at the basis of contributions. Are there opportunities to make contributions more progressive? So, for example, making sure that lower earners can have non-contributory pensions. Why are they taking out of their salaries in order to match what employers are putting in? So, for example, we could look at employers only putting that in. Why are employers actually paying out a higher proportion to higher earners, for example? We could change that balance as one idea, for example. We can also look at just reliefs. We can also look at how we can ensure that people can have contributions during periods where they're not working. For example, while women are on maternity leave, for example, or fathers are on paternity leave, when they lose those employers' contributions as well.
Thank you. And just going back to the gender pensions gap report, you mentioned the comparison with OECD countries. What are the examples of what other countries are doing that could be applicable or adaptable to a UK context that we're not doing that we could do?
So the biggest driver of the UK's position in relation to other OECD countries comes down to the design of our pension system, which is the balance between universalised, so for us that would be the state pension, versus private pensions, but also the makeup of private pensions. So, as Justin has pointed out, we're talking very much around defined contributions, where effectively these are individual savings with a tax wraparound. Whereas defined benefits, actually, we've got a pool of risk. You might take an average of somebody's lifetime salary, for example. You might take their final income. That serves women much, much better in terms of calculating that. And we know that even if we just look at the UK's figures, for example, when we take into account for the 55 to 59 age cohort, the gender pensions gap rises to it's 48% for that cohort between 2020 to 22. But once we take into account DC pensions, that rises to 75%. So you can see that actually our reliance on defined contributions, our reliance on investment strategy to make that up, but actually making sure that all of the gaps in employment, lower earnings, lower lifetime earnings, all of that becomes much, much more acute under the current design of the UK's pension system.
And are you confident that the government is in developing the appropriate plans to smooth out these sorts of challenges?
I think, speaking very frankly, that Tiffany's talked about raising contributions to 12%. I know that others have talked about raising contributions to 20%, for example. I think that if we look at the long-term projections around adequacy, I think everybody, both within the industry, everybody involved in pensions knows that if we look at DC pensions, contributions will need to rise for people to be able to have enough to retire on in terms of their private pensions. Now, right now, I'm not sure in terms of looking at stagnating wages. If we look at the lived realities, people can afford to put 20% of their current incomes into a pension in order to be able to afford to retire. And I think that that's something that we need to really stare at very hard in the face and say, actually, how can we allow a system to perpetuate when we know that people don't have enough to be able to retire on, and recognise if they don't have enough to be able to retire on, where's that money going to come from? If it's not coming from private pensions, it's going to have to come from the state.
Thank you. Tiffany and Justin, the researchers from Southampton University told us that Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities are less likely to take part in workplace pensions. Could you say a bit about work that you've done on this, and whether DWP or industry has done any work on this to understand how this issue can be addressed, and also are there other groups in a similar position?
Yeah, I can go first. So we haven't done any specific work as an institution on ethnic saving, but we know that this is an important area that other stakeholders in the industry have worked on. So we would flag the IFS research that just came out in 2025 last year, and that showed that laid the landscape out of the opt-out rates are higher in Bangladeshi and Pakistani groups, and also quite importantly, religious beliefs and or norms in Islam tend to drive the pension opt-out rates, given that Islamic teaching bans particular types of investments. So that's one area to kind of keep in mind when looking at the ethnic gender pensions gap. LGIM in 2022 flagged that there wasn't enough spare income in ethnic minority groups to save in the way that they need to, and then also there's mistrust in the workplace pension system. But I want to flag as well in terms of the wider canon of research, if it's okay to go back to what Daniella had raised about the importance of how do we address low earners and as well the different groups that could be disadvantaged, such as ethnic minorities. Pensions UK is currently working on a project to look exactly at this. What sort of flexible options are available in the AE system to allow people to contribute in different ways, that one size doesn't fit all. So keep your eyes peeled in the space for that. So that's open. And yeah, I'll pause there.
Yes, so you asked what we had done. I mean, the ABI, along with its member firms, has funded research into the ethnicity pensions gap, which is genuine. For example, there are higher opt-out rates from auto-enrolment among workers from Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds, and even when you adjust for factors such as differences in earnings or age or education levels, those differences persist. And it's believed that this may be related to Islamic teachings on savings and investment. Perhaps worth noting that most pension funds now offer Sharia-compliant funds, which may seek to address this issue to an extent. Maybe a couple of other points, and again, the ABI strongly supports reporting on the ethnicity pensions gap. We gave a strongly supportive response to the government's consultation on the draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill for mandatory reporting on ethnicity and indeed disability reporting. Since it seems to be my role in this panel sometimes to be optimistic, there is some research which is indicating that differences by ethnicity are closing over time, albeit very slowly. So there is also some positive evidence out there as well as the issues we just described.
Thank you. Just very quickly, given that we don't know the reason that there is a lower investment, is any work going on to try and understand why? So we've only got the hard data, haven't we? We need to have the soft data, which explains why Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage employees are not investing in pensions.
Yes, so the Pensions UK, it's not our project, but we are part of a research consortium. It's referred to in-house as stacked disadvantages. So it's a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today as a group, looking how different factors might come together, how one experiences life, experiences the pension system, how they come together to impact retirement outcomes. So it's led by researchers named Daniella Silcock, and we're part of the research consortium. So that's
look forward to hearing about that, because it is important. Thank you so much. John Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on to financial circumstances of today's pre-pensioners. So to what extent do you feel that the pension system has enabled people in this group, so in their 60s, shall we say, to build up an adequate income for retirement? Don't know who wants to.
Yeah, I can start this one. So essentially, there are groups that we are concerned about. In particular, it would be the Gen X and the older millennials that have had that we have the question marks drawn around right now. So particularly with these two groups, some will be coming into retirement without any DB, only some DB. Many individuals in these two groups, in the Gen X and older millennials, have AE arrived, automatic enrollment arrived too late for them, so they haven't had enough time to build up the kind of size of pension pot that we ideally would like them to have. So these two groups will struggle financially. I think it's accepted. In terms of what to do about them, I think some of them who are lucky enough will be able to draw on housing wealth they will inherit, but that obviously is not everyone. And those that can't will have to extend their working life where possible, and where and we as an industry need to make, and the government need to make sure that journey is smooth for that. So I mentioned the tax system as well, making sure the incentives were there for people to work if they were able and would like to. And then as well, falling back on pension credit and social housing will have to be what happens.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, did you want to say anything?
No.
I mean, it is clear that there is an issue with this group, and I mean, as Tiffany alluded, they were sort of, broadly speaking, too late to benefit from DB, but too early to build up a substantial DC pot. And the DWP's own report says that weekly occupational pension income is expected to fall in real terms from the next decade. So as this cohort reach retirement, they, as I said before, someone retiring in 2050 is expected to have an 8% lower private pension income compared to someone retiring last year in real terms. And there is more good work showing that if you look across the group in the 60s, you can see differences between sort of younger 60s and older 60s. So if you look at relative poverty, for example, singles are always have more poverty than those who are couples, but the figures are different between the different generations. That if you look at type of housing tenure, again, those who are in the older 60s have greater rates of poverty than those who are in the early 60s. So it's definitely right to highlight such a group. In terms of what can be done about them, I mean, I think we have to be honest, maybe as Tiffany also said, if you're near retirement age, solutions are relatively limited. I mean, you can work for longer. The state pension and the benefit system will provide some assistance when you become due for them, but there are perhaps limits to what you can do. But communication and guidance for such groups are very important. And I mean, again, the first panel gave a lot of very good evidence on this. And initiatives such as targeted support and pensions dashboards, I think, will be helpful here. Likewise, the Pay Your Pension Some Attention initiative by the industry and others to draw people's attention to looking at their pension and their entitlements is, I think, a very worthwhile initiative.
I think it's important when we look at age cohorts that we can compare cohorts against cohorts, but we also need to look within cohorts as well. And what we see are two parallel processes of accumulative advantage. So those that have purchased property, that the value of that property has increased over time, that they have worked within jobs and roles that have given them sufficient pensions income. These are people who have both pensions wealth, they have other assets as well, they have choice, and they have agency when they reach retirement age. We see at the same time that people who haven't had those advantages, who work within lower income roles, who have periods of unemployment, who perhaps are on benefits at certain points within their working lives, who haven't been able to access property, and who have a cumulative disadvantage which adds up over time. So even, for example, when we see with women who perhaps are working within their sort of late 50s or early 60s, who perhaps have managed to sort of catch up in terms of their income, they haven't necessarily been able to catch up in terms of their pensions accumulation over time. And so they've got less time to make good a lot of the sort of accumulative disadvantages that they have faced during the life course as well. And so I think that when we look at pensions needs, we need to look at those interactions and also recognising that, health outcomes are also worse when we look at poverty. And so that we look at people who not only are in worse health, but also potentially are looking after family members as well. We haven't talked about social care. I know that's not within the scope and the purview of this, but there is a direct interaction between social care and older age. And we look at how social care is funded. I know that the Casey review is happening. We look at the provision of unpaid care as well, that we see that those people who perhaps need to work in order to make good their pension are also those who are providing unpaid social care. Carers UK, for example, did research that showed that 61% of those who are providing unpaid care are also want to work more. And so people are trading off that provision of looking after relatives, looking after both older relatives, potentially younger relatives as well in terms of women, and that's taking them out of that ability to be able to earn and to be able to save in terms of their pensions.
Thank you. I think you've answered the question I was about to ask you about care, but that's great. Thank you. So Stephen Webb, former pensions minister. So, in talking specifically about the phasing down of DB and but the cavalry of the automatic enrolment not yet over the hill, so he described the UK pensions policy as a slow motion car crash. Would you agree with that, Justin? I think you were more optimistic earlier.
Yes, I mean I was more optimistic because pensioner poverty has reduced, but there are certainly problems within the system. There are issues in relation to state pension. There are issues in relation to private pensions. I guess the only thing I would say is that the benefit of slow motion is that it gives you time to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, very succinct. Very good.
I would concur completely. I think that there are huge red flags that if we don't act now, then there will be a car crash. But because we know that it's coming, there are things that we can do and there are things that we can control. So we can't control systemic inequality within the pensions industry, but what we can do is, as I said, making sure that certain policy levers are pulled to give additional safety net. So contribution rates, raise that immediately. Remove all the obstacles on the road that prevent people from saving from the very beginning, so lower the automatic enrollment age. That will help women as well, and removing the lower earners limit. And making sure there's stability as well in the messaging to incentivize saving. So I know tax has come up. We would say, for instance, we haven't talked about the way people behave in accessing their pensions yet, but we know in previous budgets when there's been a lot of speculation in the media about well, are they going to change the tax system? And there's been a rush, a very unhelpful rush of people withdrawing their cash. And we would urge stability in the tax system and have that messaging clear from government so that people know what to expect, so there isn't this kind of rush of poor decision making.
Thank you.
Can I just strongly agree with Tiffany's last point? I mean, trust really matters in pensions. I mean, people give their money to institutions for decades at a time, and they have to really trust them. And part of that trust is in stability of the system, and that is vital. Other initiatives will also help. Things like value for money will help in terms of building trust. Other steps being contemplated, such as the mandation of investment, will not. But as I said, but the point that Tiffany made about the need for trust is very, very important.
Thank you. Daniella, anything to add?
Sadly, I would agree with that assessment. And it's interesting that we've got that idea of a car crash, and we talk a lot about sort of dashboards as solving the problem. Well, a dashboard only helps if you can course correct. And so, for me, I think that we need to look at the incentives, we need to look at the interactions, and we need to look at the assumptions that underpin how we frame our pensions. Are pensions actually serving people who need them? Can we call them pensions by any way, shape or form? We've moved very far away from the idea of pooled risk, of community risk, for example. We've moved very, very far away from that and really into an environment of individualized risk where the most vulnerable are, as I see it, least well served by the system as it stands. And I think it's a point worth making that this is a very well-funded system as a whole. There are over £3.6 trillion of assets under management within our pension system. There should be no reason why people are retiring without enough in old age. So really what we are looking at is a distribution issue, and that's really what we need to address. It's not that there isn't enough money.
Thank you. Powerful point.
Thank you. We're against the clock, folks, so if you could reduce your responses, that would be very helpful. And I'm moving over to Rushnara Ali.
To Tiffany first. So just picking up on the pensioners who draw down their pensions as soon as they're allowed to, and who are on low incomes, how much understanding is there among policymakers about what's driving that, and also, the extent to which it's being done in order to deal with immediate living costs?
The question is understanding what do we understand
of those who are on low incomes who are drawing on their pensions.
What was the second part of your question?
Just in terms of immediate living costs, is that what's driving it?
Okay. So there is data, but the data is incomplete. It's an incomplete picture, and the data that we have is reliable. But the problem is that we only know people's behaviour in terms of the particular pot that you're looking at. So the data that we have, like I was just ferreting through my notes looking for the data that my team gave me. So we know, for instance, that 48% of people take full cash, withdraw completely, and then 42% take partial cash out. But the problem with this is that you're only looking at one pot in particular. So someone who takes out all their money, that may in of itself might not be a poor decision if they've got 10 other pots to play with. So I think that is...
Do we know? Do you know?
We don't know. It's not possible to know. We don't have the facility to capture that data yet. But we do know enough that in terms of what's driving it. I think some of the research that will be coming through with our stacked disadvantaged work that we're in the shared consortium should help answer some of those questions. And I think what's really important is to think about the guidance to give people to make those decisions. So in a way, it's almost it's not so much we can't control what's driving it, but we know what's happening. We know people are coming to retirement without enough. So give them the right tools, give them the right guidance, give them the right advice.
Is what's available appropriate, or there needs to be more guidance?
I think the guidance there is appropriate, but it's about engagement. There isn't enough engagement.
Yes, I mean, just to build on what Tiffany said, I mean, in terms of personal pensions, I mean, FCA figures show that 56% of people take it all, take the whole pot. We know that something like 2/3 of people stop before state pension age, so they are presumably relying either on savings or on their private pension. And this emphasises again the need to have regard to the interaction between the state pension age and the private pension system, that changes which may address issues in the state pension system will have potentially adverse consequences for the private system.
Daniella.
I'm not going to take too long on this. All I would say is absolutely agree that this is an area that needs much greater research. We need to understand why people are doing that. We know that people with smaller pots behave very differently from people with larger pots, and that they do tend to take out the cash. We know anecdotally that people are saying that they're doing that because they need that money to live on until they reach, say, pension age, but absolutely building an evidence base around this is needed.
Are any of you aware of anything that the government's doing on this to understand it better, and awareness among policymakers in the department?
I'm not, no.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, the DWP has produced quite a bit of research on the sort of financial position of people in their 60s.
But in terms of the drivers and the reasons behind why they're doing it?
I mean, there is some information out there. So, I mean, to take the 60 to 64 age group, for example, they know that the biggest reason that people are inactive is retirement, but the second biggest and close behind it is ill health or disability. So, they have ideas of what is driving inactivity and then financial pressures.
Thank you.
Thank you. David Baines.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. So there have been changes in the pensions landscape, such as pension freedoms, which it could be argued have exposed people to new risks. For that age group, that cohort in their early 60s on low incomes, how do you see those changes affecting those people? What do they need to know in order to help them plan for the future?
Pension freedoms is a tricky one, because I think it's allowed people to have much needed access to cash, as Daniella was saying. I think in of itself, withdrawing money is not always a bad decision, because people, if they use that money in a particular way to help pay down debt, such as mortgage, but the risk here, as you're alluding to, would be the misunderstanding around how much time or ability you have left to rebuild those savings, the present bias of, I need to do this now and it feels right, and discounting long-term consequences. And I think what we have, so a question from the committee earlier was about, is the guidance and information correct? It is right. I think it's about communicating it more to get the engagement. So we've got, for instance, at Pensions UK, something called the Pay Your Pension Some Attention, which has been incredibly successful. And we do that in tandem with the ABI. We're partners in this campaign. And I think that isn't just for those targeted in the 60s. It's just to the population to say, hey, we know you're very busy and very stressed, but please just stop and look and just check to see what you have. I think then the second kind of part that we hope that once you get their attention, direct them towards what we have, our retirement living standards, to say, okay, now that we've got your attention, just check to see what have you got in there and what do you need to do to get the kind of retirement lifestyle that you would imagine for yourself when you retire. And then that in tandem with the guidance that's out there, I think signposting is really important, which we're doing it. We need to do more as an industry, and the government needs to do more as well. Money Helper, pension-wise, the stuff that's in the bill right now, so the guided retirement choices, targeted support, stronger nudge, all these are there. We just need to get people to pay attention. So we think our campaign that Justin's organisation might will help with that.
I mean, there's benefits to the pensions freedom, and that great care should be taken in restricting them, because people have very diverse circumstances. So the idea of choice at and around retirement age is important, reflecting the different circumstances that everyone faces. So I think, there would be issues there. As Tiffany said, communications is very important. I mean, she's mentioned the Pay Your Pension Some Attention. The targeted support, I mean, something like only 9% of people take regulated financial advice. Targeted support is an initiative which the ABI welcomes, which is intended to enable those who provide sort of advice to offer something which is not fully personalised, but nonetheless will sort of help different cohorts. And that is something, in terms of helping people understand their situation and their choices, that is welcome.
I think just one point worth making is that if I were not giving regulated advice, to that age cohort coming through, particularly in relation to women, one of the reasons why we have so many older single women is because women live longer. So actually looking at dependence and what that looks like for both married couples, for cohabiting couples, also divorce and the impact of divorce in terms of older women's pensions, we know that has a very real impact, and actually that would be a key consideration that I think that we need to look at, is the increasing number of single pensioners, and actually what does that mean in terms of financial reality. Thank you.
Thank you. John Mill.
Thank you, Chair. So the pension age is going up, so it's going to continue to go up. Where do you see the most important mitigations? Is it in helping people early enough to build up a proper pension pot, or is it in like the Mayfield recommendations of the Mayfield Review, Vanguard employers, etc.? How do you see the balance? I don't know who wants to go on that. We have very little time to say.
I mean, I would say both are important. I mean, helping people build up what is clearly desirable. Mayfield, to the extent that recommendations of Mayfield help people stay in work, that is generally better for them, and obviously better for their pensions. I mean, the ABI is kind of pleased to be a Vanguard employer as part of the Mayfield initiative, and I think that I wouldn't weight either of these. Both are important.
I agree both. I think we also need to look at the type of work that people are doing. We know that women are much more likely to work in hospitality, retail, health and social care, and actually their ability to be able to work full-time, and actually looking at the interaction or the expectation for full-time work in those age groups as well. I think we should look at that and the interaction with in-work benefits as well.
So I'm going to go back to being a broken record. So for us, the main things is always we try to hammer home the message, contribution rates, raise them. We know that the pots are not enough, so just raise it to 12%. We can phase it in, and it gives people the best chance of having a bigger pot throughout their journey in their working life. The tax system, make it work, incentivize. We know that people are going to have to work for longer. It's already increasing now. It might need to increase again. Make sure those incentives are there in the tax at the end. Keep the system stable so people don't start withdrawing cash in a panic. Remove the lower earnings limit and lower the age of the automatic enrollment trigger as well for when people. So when people start to work, their pound of first earning works for them from the very beginning in their pension savings.
Thank you very much. Jeff.
Thank you. The last question from me. We know that the increase in the state pension age from 66 to 67 starts this April. What realistically can be done in such a short time scale to mitigate any issues that some people will experience as a result of that? Can you give me your top priority? And I'll go along starting with Daniella.
Pensions credit.
Pensions credit. Justin?
Communication.
Communication.
Communication, 10 years. we got 3 months now. Okay. Thank you all. You've been fantastic. Really, really enjoyed this session. Order,